Okay, well, welcome to our conversation. I'm Ray McDonald, and I work within the Christian community for Leket Israel, the National Food Bank. And I'm really happy to have a friend of mine, David Nekrutman, who is joining us. We're going to talk a little bit about Shemitah. And David, thanks a lot for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to greet you from Zion, which is what we are doing right now, is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy in our lifetime.
Well, David, it looks like you're in the heart of Zion at the Kotel.
But, yeah, this is my virtual background. I live in Netanya. I just want to make that very clear.
On the coast. Excellent. So, David, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. You work with an organization called the Isaiah Project, but so you are Jewish.
That's true.
And we both have a connection to Oral Roberts University. They're great friends of Leket. But what's a good Jewish boy like yourself involved with Oral Roberts? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
First, again, what an honor to be with you, Ray. We've known each other for years, but this is a great opportunity to connect on a more profound level and to reach out to people who are eager and hungry to search their roots, for Christians to search their Hebraic roots. And for over 20 years, I have served the calling of Jewish-Christian relations. It began at the Israeli consulate in New York from 2000 to 2004. Where I served as the director for Christian affairs. And if you ever heard of the Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem with Bishop Robert Stearns, that started off in my office, as well as probably the first Christian Birthright program, where we took Christian university students to Israel for 3 weeks. So I've been involved in a lot of things behind the scenes during my first 4 years with the Israeli consulate that has now been adopted by many, many Christians around the world, including the Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem. So a lot of my inroads began with Bishop Robert Stearns when I started off at the Israeli consulate in New York. And through him, I was introduced to other leadership. And in 2005, back then with my wife and two children, my 2 sons, I have 3 sons since then, I came back to fulfill prophecy. I'm the first of my side of the family after 2,000 years to return back to the land of Israel and to be a chapter heading in sacred history by living here and being a steward of the land. I didn't think I was going to get back into the calling of Jewish-Christian relations because I was an immigrant after all. And I needed to find a way to make a living. And I started off with Geffen Publishing, a Jerusalem-based publishing company, and I was a salesman. I originally was supposed to be the speechwriter for Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. That was the plan, but we have a saying in Judaism, we plan and God laughs. So that job ended up literally at the last minute because there was a snafu on the bureaucratic side of the Prime Minister's office that they asked me to do them a favor and then work with the Minister of Tourism. And through a whole series of bureaucratic issues that happened, I never had a job. And I came in thinking I had as a speechwriter. And it eventually turned out to be that I worked for Geffen Publishing as my first job as a salesman. And then I worked for a high-tech company. And then one day, Rabbi Riskin, he was the chief rabbi of Efrat. He was the head of Or Torah Stone, an educational institution of 3,500 students through 16 different campuses, 30 branches under Or Torah Stone. He heard about me, was interested in changing the status quo within Orthodox Judaism to proactively engage with Christians. And so one fateful November evening, Rabbi Riskin gives me a call and says, meet me at Ben Gurion Airport at midnight. So I said to my wife, I'll be home late. Don't wait up for me. So I met with Rabbi Riskin And the first question he asked me was, where did I learn? And so when a rabbi asks someone my age back then, where did you learn? It doesn't mean what university, it means what Jewish parochial school did you attend?
Okay.
In Jewish language, it's called the yeshiva, but it's a Jewish parochial school. And I told him I went to a yeshiva of Brooklyn, and he says, I went there too. And I said, I know, but he obviously, Rabbi Riskin is a little older than me. And we were reminiscing about our alma mater. And then he asked me the question, I'm interested in opening up a center to actively engage with Christians. I see a profound change within the Christian world towards the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And he's received a calling from God to change the course of the Orthodox Jewish denominations engagement with Christians. And I said, well, I want to be fair to you. I only do this from faith. This is not about a Kodak moment. Get the picture in the paper. It's not about media. It's simply about the relationship, because I believe with all my heart, I can't be who I am as a Jew without you. Now, I know that Christians often say in the Christian Zionist world, I can't be a Christian without the Jewish people. But I can't be who I am as a complete full Jew living in Israel without a partnership with the world. And the only people and the only faith community that I've seen is a remnant within Christendom that believes that they're grafted into the covenantal experience with the Jewish people, that they believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They don't seek to replace the Jewish people in the covenantal experience, that they share in that experience. And therefore, there's a relational redemptive model that we have an opportunity to engage with. And I explained that to Rabbi Riskin. I'm only here to do it from that perspective. And to the credit of Rabbi Riskin, he says, sure, that's what we should be doing. And then in January of 2008, we officially opened up our doors. And I served in the position of an executive director for the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation under the umbrella organization of Or Torah Stone. And then last year, September of last year, I transitioned from that position to take on another calling in my life, my own download from God, to serve this calling in a different dynamic. And that's through the Isaiah Projects, which is a team of Christians who have a heart for other Christians to discover the Hebraic roots of their faith. And since I've been teaching for 20 years and engaging with Christians, they asked me to come and be their Israel director. And obviously the main focus is for Christians to discover the Hebraic roots, but more focused is to work within the Christian homeschool world to develop Bible Hebraic curriculums for high school, to discover their family that is normally not taught in Christian schools, about the Jewish people, about Israel, about what does it mean to dissect scripture from a Hebraic perspective. So we're on a new path to engage with a younger generation than ever before. And so therefore, at the age of 48, I felt a call to do that. God had placed me in certain situations where I was teaching young adults and it was resonating. And so this opportunity came along. I still speak in churches. I still engage with Christian academics, but I see that there's a need, and God has asked me to place myself into that gap to be a better bridge between a younger generation who have a heart and desire to know God, to know his scripture in a more profound way. And if I can serve that in any capacity and begin that journey, so be it.
Wow,
That's where I'm at.
David,
it's very exciting.
So let's I want you to unpack this a little bit further. Your conversation with Rabbi Riskin.
Yeah.
I want you just to elaborate a tiny bit on this, because we as Christians, as evangelicals and Christian Zionists, the whole concept of our connectedness to your people is well spelled out in the book of Romans, Paul
Romans 9,
says to the
9,
Romans.
10, and 11.
Well, in particular, chapter 11, for sure.
Correct.
If the root is holy, then so are the branches. And so Paul describes Gentile believers in Hashem, the God of Israel, as being like wild olive branches that have been removed from the tree and then grafted in to that cultivated olive tree, God's covenants with Israel. So we certainly, you're absolutely right. Judaism does not need Christianity to explain its existence, but the New Testament and Christianity has no substance at all without the Tanakh, without the Old Testament and God's covenants with Israel. But now you seem to be describing almost the reverse of that in your life.
Yeah, correct.
Explain.
I know.
that a little further.
I see Ray's wonderment on how I can say that. So again, Christianity is not going to define Judaism. That's correct. But in Hebrew scriptures, our whole task as a nation. So Judaism defines itself not only as a faith system, but it defines itself as a nation. And that nation has a particular geographic location to steward. And in order to bring redemptive history into the here and now, we actualize God's will based upon what's written in the Hebrew scriptures, interpreted through the lens of the body of the sages in our history to understand God's directives. That's not clearly spelled out, but you'll see throughout the prophetic history in the Bible that there's always a partnership between us as Jews and the rest of the world. You can't be a light unto the nations. And I don't mean this in a condescending perspective. There's truly a partnership between us. How are we going to bring God into the world if there's no partners? If we're simply going ahead and bringing it only from this geographic location, there needs to be a partnership with everyone else who also believes in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and do not necessarily have to go ahead and become Jewish to do so. We're okay with the God-fearers who believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to be in partnership with us, and doesn't mean you have to be in line with every single practice of what Judaism has expressed itself over the last 2,000 years. So I can give you an example of a Psalm 117, which is the shortest psalm in the book of Psalms, where basically the nations are praising, the people are praising God for what He's done to us. The second to the last verse in the book of Isaiah, here's this universal prophet who envisions that everyone will be celebrating the Sabbath and the new moon,
the Goyim,
the holidays, right? The Moadim. So how's that going to happen if we're not speaking to one another? If there's not a true trust in the partnership? So in the definition of who I am as a nation, in conjunction with my non-Jewish friends, well, that's you, because I don't know of any other faith community that comprises of nations that also believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, have accepted the canon of the Hebrew scriptures. And I'm okay that you have lived your life out through a lens that's different than mine.
Okay,
I don't need unity in our complete faith system of how we practice and express ourselves as Jews to fulfill what needs to be done for God in His time and in His will.
Wow. So yeah, for Christians, Israel is the land where it all began, and it's the land where it's all going to end. So for sure, our faith is rooted in exactly what you're describing, rooted in the land and the people of Israel. Okay.
I hope I cleared that up, because I want to make that very clear. I think the phenomenon that you have expressed is relatively new in Christendom. For many have interpreted Romans 11 as that I am the fallen branches, and that the church has replaced Israel. The idea that the root and branch idea in that a metaphor of the olive tree in Romans 11 to be interpreted as Christians are grafted into the covenantal experience with the Jewish people is a recent phenomenon
Yes.
within Christian theology. So that in of itself, to me, is a miracle of major proportions, because for so long, Romans 11 has been sort of a proof text for the opposite.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Ray, you're a miracle according to, from my perspective, and I, as a finite human being, have to be willing to live in mystery that although we don't express the sameness,
Yes.
how we live our life with God, does not mean that there's not a partnership to be nurtured. And that's sort of been my life for the last 20 years, is to develop that. So I
Very
went
good,
from, yeah,
David. So yeah, I think that it's my life as well.
Okay.
The last number of years from the other side of the fence. And by the way, my wife thinks that I'm a miracle as well. But what I was thinking is a prominent theology in evangelical circles, dispensationalism. I don't want to get too heavy into theology, but it's barely 150 years old. And that's a Christian theology that opened up the idea that, hey, Israel's still in the picture. It's in the picture in the past. It's going to be in the picture in the future. And so I think that's really been embraced by evangelicals for a number of years. But I mean, Christian leaders like C.H. Spurgeon, who very much affirmed God's covenants with Israel, that they have not been abrogated. So this is very exciting, very interesting.
Yeah, so I want to answer your question with Oral Roberts University. That again, I want to give credit to the former president of Oral Roberts University, Dr. Mark Rutland, along with with my great friend, but also he was my thesis advisor, Dr. Brad Young.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I was the executive director for the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation, I used to go on academic campuses and speak. And Brad and I became good friends over the years, and he often invited me into his classroom, where his major classes were about the Hebraic roots of Christianity. So he invited me to speak to his master classes at Oral Roberts University. And then since we became friends, then Mark Rutland also has a organization called, give me a second. I got to remember it, but the purpose of it is to take women out of sex trafficking and help them transition out from that lifestyle. So he used to bring his donors to Israel, and he invited me one evening in Tiberias to give a Bible study. And the way I started off the Bible study is that sometimes the shortest verse in the Bible can often teach us the greatest lesson. And I said, well, let me come from a Christian perspective. What is the shortest verse in the New Testament? And everyone just shouts out, Jesus wept. And I said, well, if a Jew would be tackling this particular text, we would be asking, why is Jesus crying? And I said, if you actually look at the Greek and you pay attention to the Greek word for Jesus wept, and then you go a few verses back where the people were weeping, it's two different words. And the way you can look at it is that the people were wailing and Jesus was shedding a tear. Two different ways of looking at this. So I said that, isn't it great that the humanity of Jesus was brought into the picture of his best friend who's in front of him, that he lies dead, that he doesn't remove himself from that situation and feels that situation. How much more so for anyone shepherding a flock who's a leader in ministry to take that into consideration as well. So I then go into a lesson on the shortest verse in the Hebrew Bible, and I do a 40-minute presentation on that. But Mark comes over to me afterwards. He says, I was working on that message for 6 weeks, and you did that in a minute and a half. And as a joke, I said, well, that's my entrance exam into Oral Roberts University. And then he just got really serious, and he says, well, if your rabbi agrees with it, we'll make it happen. And that's the the introduction into how I ended up in
Wow.
Oral Roberts University.
Very interesting.
So I became one of the that I know of. I usually say I'm the only one, but I'm going to say one of the very few Orthodox Jewish individuals to graduate from a theology program from an evangelical university.
So I have a question for you. Just
Yeah.
coming back to how you're describing your mission, regarding the Goyim, regarding the Gentile world or the nations. Okay, now let me ask you this. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, talks more about the ger, the stranger, than it does about Shabbat. Now,
That you should love, you should not oppress the resident in the land.
okay. Now we know what the modern translation for the word ger is.
No, I'm not going to give you what eventually became a particular way of translating ger to mean a convert. And that the resident in the land meant someone who was a non-Israelite in the 5 books of Moses. So I'm not going to go ahead and play interpretive historical translation with you.
Sure you are. So you use the expression a God-fearer. Okay. Yeah. So this is these were Gentiles in the time of the New Testament, before the New Testament, during the New Testament time. And they were Gentiles that embraced, if I can say, Judaism, embraced the people and the God of Israel. And Paul, in the book of Acts, frequently, when he would come into a town, he would go to shul, he'd go to the synagogue, and he would address, fellow countrymen and God-fearers. Here's the question. I don't know if you know where I'm going with this. So in a sense, someone just like me, there's a bunch of us out there now. In a sense, are they the modern ger?
That's a great question. So there is no. So I want to make this preface because I know some Jews will be watching this and probably be shocked what I'm going to say. We don't have an authority figure today that will define you as a God-fearer. But I will say, as a minority opinion, that your belief in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the way you live your life as a Christian, that I see you within that category as a God-fearer.
Wow.
Now, I want to make that very clear. It doesn't mean my co-religious. And I know I will get criticism from certain rabbis who don't like this relationship to happen. But I'm comfortable with saying that because at the end of the day, what often Orthodox Jews do to Christians, which I think is unfair, is demote your status. And what do I mean by that? They try to say to you, become a Noahite. And I'm like, well, I understand the Noahite. And for your listeners out there, meaning there's 7 mandatory directives that usually is in line with what we call natural law. You should set up courts, and people shouldn't steal and murder, and so on and so forth. Well, that's the basic of the Noahite. But you as a Christian have gone beyond just 7. Even if you take out all the ritual, which is what most Christian denominations will see in the Hebrew Bible, anything ritual won't be mandatory, but anything that has to deal with personal relationships between your fellow human being, that's still on the books, and actually more pronounced in the Sermon on the Mount and in the Sermon of the Plain.
Very good.
Right. So there's 2 sermons that we should be looking at that actually make more restrictions than normally what a Noahite would go through.
Putting a hedge around the Torah.
Right. Putting in essence, putting a fence around the spirit of those directives to ensure that you don't come into violation of God's will. Because in serving God, like serving human beings and doing God's work here is serving God. That's sort of your connection, because we're all created in the image of him, and therefore our service must be done in that image. So therefore, for me to demote you is an insult. I have to take you for where you are at. I shouldn't demand a prepackaged Christian at all. This is a mystery for you as it is for me. It is something that is a wonderment for Jews who are engaged in this sacred calling, that you see yourself and you put your destiny with the Jewish people, even though your predecessors didn't do that. And in fact, many people who consider themselves church-going Christians in the name of Jesus did horrible things to the Jewish people. And it's not me to put that entire burden on your shoulders. You do not bear the responsibility of the individuals in Christendom on that. I think, unfortunately, Jews love to put the entire history on the shoulders of Christians, of the anti-Semitic history that took place between both our faith communities. Wow. I have to take you from where you are right now, because God has called you to do this. So who am I to judge and be jury on how you should be in the relationship to me? You got here. We're here. We're having the conversation. Nice. So I have to respect where you're coming from. And it's not for me to demote you in your status, nor is it for me to tell you to compromise on any iota in creed and doctrine of how you express yourself as a Christian.
Wow. Very nice, David. Well, there's a whole lot. There's a whole lot of additional conversations there, and just how you spoke. Our time is up.
It is.
It is.
Wow. We just got started, Ray. All right.
Famous last words. David, tell us a little bit about yourself. Okay, so we want to do this again, I think. We want to talk about Shemitah, the sabbatical year. So in our next conversation.
Sure. My honor.
Wow. Really exciting. You shared your heart, and it really was a blessing to have you, David. And yeah, definitely love to continue the conversation. David Nekrutman, the Isaiah Projects, visit his website.
For right now, the website that we're using is www.yoursabbathinvitation.com. As you know, Ray, I'm going to the United States in March for a whole month to do a book tour. And Your Sabbath Invitation, the title of the book, is designed for Christians to understand the why of Sabbath without a promotion of doing an Orthodox Jewish practice of Sabbath. I want to make that very clear. And we dissect all the texts prior to Sinai.
Wow. That's
to understand the value and the why of Sabbath. And
Shabbat in the Ten Commandments, the only mitzvah, the only commandment that God says, don't forget. Remember the Sabbath. To keep
remember the Sabbath.
I'm Ray McDonald, Christian Friends of Leket.org, and we'll see you next time.